Leslie Lee is a prolific writer who's been crafting captivating stories since the age of 6, with a diverse literary repertoire, including the enchanting fantasy romance adventure Child of Dawn, where her love for the written word comes alive, like a vivid cinematic experience. And Leslie is with us here. How are you today?
I'm fabulous after that introduction. Thank you so much. Wow.
So, what was the inspiration behind Child of Dawn, and how did you develop that concept?
It was incredibly interesting. Usually when I get an idea for a book, it just comes out of nowhere. There'll be something that I see or I hear, and then we just kind of go from there. And Child of Dawn, I had recently read the story of Beauty and the Beast to some little kiddos, and I started thinking about the idea, and it kind of came from the concept of what if Beauty met Beast, but instead of Beauty changing Beast back into the prince with her love, they ended up changing one another. And loving each other in spite of their appearances and their differences. And so it kind of just, that was the initial premise, and then it kind of just exploded.
Yeah.
I've always been kind of obsessed with vampire lore, not just Dracula, which is, the obvious go-to if you like vampires, but like going back before Dracula. And so, of course, I had to bring in the idea of, instead of Beast being a beast, he's a vampire elf mutant, as it were. So that's where it comes from.
Yeah. And what is it that you believe sets this fantasy romance adventure apart from some of your other works that you've done before?
This is my first fantasy. I love the I call them the classic fantasies, like Lord of the Rings and Chronicle of Narnia. I grew up reading those, but I tend to do more historical fiction.
Yeah.
That's my main genre, and so I wanted to challenge myself and see if I could kind of create this entire world that doesn't exist, first in my head and then put it on a piece of paper. So
Yeah. So how do you approach the challenge of switching genres like that, given the diversity in your literary works?
It's a big difference.
Yeah.
I did a lot of research, first kind of on, like I said, like the origins of vampire stories, predating Dracula and Bram Stoker. But then I also delved into how Tolkien was inspired, how Lewis was inspired. Both of them created, just universes, really, that stories were placed in. And I knew I had to do that. So I kind of came up with a framework, and then I, proceeded from there. And it was a constant growing process. I didn't have all the ideas and all the places and all the characters when I started. I knew what I wanted to begin with and what I wanted to finish with. And then I just have continued to paint this world as I continued to write.
Absolutely. And were there any personal experiences or influences that played a role in shaping the narrative of the book?
That is a fabulous question. I think, one of the plot themes that is in the book is loving somebody in spite of who they are, agreeing with one another on the premise that even if you don't have similar beliefs or similar lifestyles or backgrounds or cultures, it doesn't matter. There still can be peace and reconciliation, especially in the world we live in now. None of those ideas were really intentional when I started writing, but living in present day where there's just chaos over everything, and you don't look like me and therefore I'm not going to like you, or you don't believe the same thing and therefore I'm not going to like you, is such a prevalent thing that we hear about. And so and I've grown up with a lot of that. Writing's not a prevalent hobby or profession. Not everybody does it, and so there's been a lot of teasing that I've gone through as a child and a young adult. I have a son who has disabilities. He's autistic, and I've watched him struggle and be challenged because he's different. His mind works differently. family. And so there's a lot of that in the book, learning to be who you are in spite of what people may think of you or believe about you, and ultimately learning to shine with whatever gift or ability that you've been given.
Absolutely. And you mentioned the themes there. How do you manage to kind of incorporate the themes into your writing without compromising the storytelling?
Right. Yeah. Well, that's a challenge.
Yeah.
I tend to always have characters in my writing that have something to overcome. Obviously, because I've faced challenges. And so that's always kind of a starting point. Who is this character because of the challenges that they come across or they face? A lot of times, like in the historical fiction, it's been somebody who is not well off, struggles to make their place in society, in spite of lack of education or lack of finances or whatever. And so I have to kind of like merge and twist the idea that I want to get across. But obviously, like in this case, it's in a fictional world. So how do you put real life value and real life truth into something that isn't real? And that was definitely a challenge, especially in like the tone and in the writing. You don't want to just say it like you would in present day. You want to make it a bit more flowery, or, paint a different picture than if you were talking about 2023.
Yeah, absolutely. You've written so many books before, and as I mentioned, this is the first fantasy one. So what was it that actually made you want to step into this genre originally?
I love a challenge. I actually wrote the one and only like modern day book I ever wrote was actually written off a dare. I had a friend who's basically said, you write like these flowery, romantic period pieces. Why don't you try to write something like real? And so I did. And this had always been, I've read a lot of really good fantasy fiction, and I've read a lot of bad fantasy fiction. And so I kind of wanted to challenge myself and say, all right, you've said it, there's good and there's bad, write something good and rise to the occasion. And this book actually took me the longest out of any book I've ever written because of that, as I wanted it to be genuine and good and not corny or so far out there that people were like, what did I just read?
Yeah. And you mentioned that before this you were doing the kind of romance and period stuff. Is there still a bit of romance in this book?
Oh, absolutely. I can't write a book without a good romance. Those are the chapters that probably are the most challenging for me, because I don't want it to be corny and don't want it to be over the top. I want it to be just right. And so I that is a challenge for me, and I do struggle with those chapters. I have a 11-year-old daughter. She could pick up this book and read it and not be like terrified of what she's reading. But then I still want, full-grown adults to be able to read it and enjoy it. So there's kind of like that fine line that I walk between, it being a really good romance and it being like too steamy for a minor to read, Yeah.
Well, speaking of which, you actually started writing when you were 6 years old. So what was it that prompted that passion at such a young age?
Specifically, Charlotte's Web by E. White and The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe, obviously by C.S. Lewis. My mother would read to me when I was really little. We would sit on the couch and she would read me a chapter a day, and I just fell in love with being able to kind of shut out the world and visualize what she was reading in my mind. And I couldn't, once I was able to, read a chapter book, I couldn't stop reading. I think I read Lion, the Witch, the Wardrobe when I was 7. So it's just been this continuous love affair with the written word, and wanting to now not only like be able to read something and absorb it myself, but then put something on paper or on my computer for somebody else to read, to give back what I was given as a young child.
How would you say your writing process has evolved over the years?
First, I would when I began writing, I would just take a simple piece of paper. My stories were not that long, maybe a page, if I was lucky. I remember when I was a lot younger, and dial-up was coming around, the beginnings of the internet, and I was able to it took a lot to be able to research, because you had to, start your computer and dial up and whatever.
Oh, yes.
And I didn't have my own. I had to use my parents, so I had to wait for them to be done. But I remember being able to start to create stories off of what I was able to get so readily off the internet. And from there, I kind of I went down a rabbit hole. It was just this continuous world where you had an idea, and you went from, when I was little, it was, okay, once upon a time, the end. But then as I grew up, it became much more emotion driven, things in life that impacted me, like we've talked about, would be put in my writing. In high school, where you're kind of figuring out who you are. Everything was on paper. I mean, I still have books and books and books of just all my emotions going onto paper, and short stories and poems and journal entries. And that's literally how I kind of was able to grow up and kind of become grounded, was through my writing.
Yeah. Do you think that your writing has improved since you were 6 years old?
I hope so. I really hope so.
Yeah. In what ways do you think it has improved? It obviously has since you were 6, but in what kind of specific things do you think that over the years has got better?
I've gotten a lot of feedback about how I'm a very descriptive writer. I remember being in high school and reread A Tale of Two Cities. And there's a passage in there that just talks about, I want to say it's A Tale of Two Cities. I'm now worried my English teacher is going to call me out on this and say, there's a passage in a Charles Dickens book that takes about 5 pages to describe how a door looks.
Oh, wow.
And that's the kind of writing that I've kind of grown into. When I was younger, everything was two-dimensional. The characters woke up one day and they decided to go on an adventure, and they went on the adventure and they killed the dragon. The end. There was no plot and there was no description. And so as I've evolved as a writer, I've really tried to hone in on being descriptive, finding different ways to say things. You don't want to just say, I love you. You want to come out, you want to come up with a really good way to say it that no one else has said it that way before,
Yeah.
so that readers are remembering your writing because of what you've written.
And do you have any specific rituals or habits that you follow during your writing sessions?
Well, so we're in my office right now, which is my closet. And if you could see around me, I have pictures on the wall of castles. This is because I have it from Child of Dawn. I have castles. I have broody looking men in white billowy shirts.
Yes.
I have quotes that I've read that have struck me. I have a bunch of books. My computer's actually being propped up by a bunch of books on vampires. And so I surround myself with visuals. I'm a very visual writer. I tend to see my books and my writing like a movie. And so when I'm trying to describe something, it's almost like I'm trying to write a screenplay, but in book form, if that makes sense. And so everything that I put on paper usually is prompted by something that I've seen. And my walls are literally covered.
Yes.
And so I start with a visual, and then I try to incorporate that into whatever I'm writing.
And do you think that makes the books easily visualable, if you get what I mean? And when you're reading it, you can imagine it.
Yes. Yeah. There's different types of readers. Some people can pick up a book and they don't need any help seeing in their minds what they're reading. That's me. I just create my own visuals. Other people, they need the help. Their minds just don't work in such a way that they can visually visually kind of see what they're reading. And so I try to kind of appeal to both. If you're a visual reader like I am, then here you go. Now just amplify it. But if you're not, then I'm going to give you the help that you need in my writing so that hopefully you can kind of create your own picture in your mind as you're reading my story.
And you mention about, namely, the big poster that you've got behind you in the office there, and AI has actually been used to create some of the artwork in Child of Dawn. So what was the reason behind the decision to do that?
Well, I've always used like Pinterest. Pinterest was my friend when Pinterest started becoming a thing. Like I was like, yes, now I have things that I can be like, ooh, that's a really cool picture. And I should use that picture to create this character, yada, yada, yada.
Yeah.
And during the course of writing Child of Dawn, AI, this was when like AI was becoming like a thing for everybody to have access to. And so I thought, well, you know, I'm such a visual writer. What if I found an AI program that I could use, give it verbal prompts and create characters so then I could go back and look at those characters as I'm writing about them. And I found a program called Night Cafe, and you basically can go on this site and give the AI a prompt and it will create images for you. And so for all the characters in Child of Dawn, there's an actual like AI generated character that I was able to like look at as I was writing about that character.
Wow.
This happens to be like the main guy, my hero in Child of Dawn, and he's on the cover, and he actually took about 3 weeks to do because AI just wasn't cooperating.
Wow.
Wasn't giving me what I wanted. So yeah.
Do you think at some point you could write a whole book with AI?
You know, I hope not, because then that means I'm out of a job. So
yes.
I mean, there's been a lot of discussion about that. Like, I really hope we don't come to that. I mean, AI is wonderful and I fully support it, but I also still want to be able to write from my heart and soul. And I think that that's a really important part of being a writer and being an author. And what you read is you need to get the author's heart behind the story that they write.
Yeah.
So that's
absolutely.
my input.
Well, what else are you working on at the moment? Do you have any upcoming projects? And if so, what genre or genres are you veering towards?
So I really loved Child of Dawn. I really loved doing the fantasy thing. I didn't think I would. I really didn't. I thought I would like challenge myself and then be done. However, my next work will be a fantasy adventure, something to do with pirates, which kind of also appeals to my history side, because they are historical, but then there's so much lore that surrounds pirates that it's kind of a sweet spot for me. So I'm working on that, and I hope to have that done by next Christmas.
Ooh, exciting. And do you think you could write a Christmas book at some point?
Anything's possible.
Yes.
I mean, you never know.
Yeah, but it'll have to be next Christmas at least, because it's Christmas Eve next week, actually.
Crazy. I can't believe it.
Yeah, I know. I said it to somebody this morning and they were like, no, it's not. And I was like, yes, it is, actually. And they were like, oh, yeah, that's smart.
No, I'm not ready.
Yes. Anyway, this book that we're talking about today is, of course, called Child of Dawn. So where are all the places that's available?
So obvious choice is Amazon. If you type it in, it should pop up. All my other stuff is available on Amazon as well. You just need to type in my name. I also have the books available through my website, which is www.myname, all one word, Leslie Ann Lee, Ann is with an E, .com. And you can buy it through there. It'll actually just link you like straight through to Amazon, but that's 2 options for you to purchase it.
Brilliant. Well, many thanks for talking to us today, and have a great Christmas.
Thank you. Merry Christmas.